Hi, I'm here with Manny Silva, also known as the Dox's Test Guy, and we are having a nice chat here at Technical Writing Uncensored. So, Manny, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well. How about yourself?
Life is good. How did you get into technical writing?
I am one of the oddballs who intended to go into technical writing.
Oh, me
Um,
too.
Yay! There aren't many of us,
Huh.
at least in my experience, but that's just anecdotal.
Well, I did
Um,
go to grad school with a bunch of them, so I may be a little biased.
okay, yeah. But I grew up with my mom disassembling and reassembling computers on the kitchen countertop.
Fun.
And my godfather worked for AMD and would bring over spare parts of his. And so my brother and I grew up building desktops. I was also a gamer. And so I came at technology with a lot of curiosity and a drive to tweak things in ways to get me what I wanted from my experience that maybe the hardware and software wasn't intended to provide. Uh, but when I was in high school, I discovered that I had a knack for English
Mhm.
and I was very good with language. And so when I got to college, I was like, okay, how do I take these two very seemingly different things and mesh them together? And I found technical writing. And so I was like, oh, hey, there's a professional and technical writing program. I'm going to do that. I was also the oddball who decided to do the creative writing minor simultaneously. But that's how I got into technical writing. And then from there, I got an internship at FileMaker, now Claris, a subsidiary of Apple. I got my master's in technical communication, and it's been off to the races.
Cool. So, how did you get technical enough to actually start writing your own software?
I didn't start writing my own software until a good ways into my career. I approached technology with curiosity, like I mentioned, but I didn't initially want to be a programmer. That's why I go into computer science. But when I was at FileMaker, I was dealing with HTML and CSS and other things, JavaScript at a small level, just by nature of dealing with the product I was documenting. And so I knew that I wanted to understand it better. And we had a production specialist at the time, and I ended up acting as his assistant from time to time. And so when trying to debug issues when he was on vacation or that sort of thing, I had to learn these skills. And it was very gradual. I didn't really feel comfortable doing any of it for like 5 years, even when I was building the
Mhm.
skills. But in the end, I ended up writing the new or a template that FileMaker used for their documentation in raw CSS, HTML, and JavaScript. It was very, very simple, but it worked. And it helped get to HTML native content when that was something they were working to transition into. Uh,
Yeah.
from from there, I worked on personal projects. I tried building stuff for myself. I had a really big side project that crashed and burned. That all helped me gradually build the skills over literally a decade to do what I do today.
I have a theory that experts are really just people who have made all of the mistakes, but kept doing it and figured out how to fix them. So,
You don't fail, you just find out ways that don't work.
good point. Yeah. So, why write a book, Mr. Dox's Tests?
Oh goodness. Because I had an idea that I couldn't let go of.
Hmm.
Um,
Obsessive much?
maybe, sure, we can call it obsessive. Let me
Dedicated. That's a much nicer word.
dedicate it. I like that framing. Let me take a step back
Hmm.
because Docs as tests itself came up because I was really, 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 really frustrated with my docs being good, and I knew
Hmm.
they were good because I stepped through them myself. And then 3, 6, 9 months down the road, they're broken. Not because the docs changed. I could look at the version history,
Hmm.
and there's no history because nothing changed, but the product changed out from under me, or UI updated, or an API endpoint behavior changed ever so slightly. And what had previously worked no longer did.
And I'm
And
guessing this is how Doc's Detective might have gotten started, or at least the seed of
Mhm.
it.
Yes, that is, well, when I first was discussing this phenomenon with my engineering teams at the time, and very good friends with them, but I was like, hey, y'all have your unit tests and integration tests and end-to-end tests. What do I have for docs? I'm like, well, Manny, that's why we have you here.
Thanks.
Exactly. I was like, expletive no. But unfortunately, at the time, that's about where the discussion stopped. Then ended up on paternity leave. I have three kids, and I was on paternity leave for the youngest, and I was doing sleep training for the middle one, which meant that I was getting no sleep. No one in the house was getting any sleep, but I had to comfort children in the dead of night while trying to let them sleep in about 5 minute increments. And so over the course of 5 weeks, I couldn't read books. I couldn't listen to podcasts. I couldn't do anything that required synchronous or sequential thought. And so I was like, what am I going to do to maintain my sanity? And so I decided, you know what? This is as good a time as any to try to tackle this broken docs problem. And so I popped open my laptop at this, what I assumed impossible task.
Mhm.
And in 5 minute microbursts of productivity, trying to focus on anything other than the screaming children, I ended up creating the first MVP of Doc Detective by the time I was off of my leave.
Wow, I feel like a slacker. All I did was play Heroes of the Storm a bunch while was on maternity leave.
I just I had to do something, and
Hmm.
I exhausted all of my other options, and nothing was working. And so just, you know what, when you have no options, the impossible seems reasonable.
Yeah, and when
um,
you're sleep deprived, everything seems possible.
yes. And so that's how Doc Detective came about. And then I was surprised that it worked, to be
Mhm.
honest. um but I started thinking, cool, this actually could be something. So
Hmm.
I iterate on it, and I started building it out. It was just for myself, but then I started talking to other people about it. I was like, hey, I built this really cool thing that can help you test your docs. And they're like, what do you mean test your docs? Like usability testing, like user studies? And it's like, no, 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 not like that at all. It's like engineering tests, but nobody had any sort of idea what it could do. And so, for those watching or listening, what Doc Detective actually does is you can take a procedure, for example, a simple procedure written in Markdown, and pass it into Doc Detective, and Doc Detective will rip apart the Markdown to identify the actionable elements of your procedure, and then it will actually perform them. It'll spin up a web browser and navigate to a search engine and run the search and capture a screenshot. Or if the screenshot's already been captured, it will check to see if there's been a substantial change between the existing screenshot and the new one. And so I was trying to explain this.
I reacted to Doc Detective's onboarding and documentation not too long ago. Link is in the description, and there will also be a link to some of Manny's demos of this cool tool in the description.
And so I was trying to explain this to people, and I was getting a lot of blank stares.
I imagine
And,
so.
and because there was literally nothing
Mhm.
before Doc Detective that could do this in this particular way. And so I took a step back and I was like, okay, how am I going to explain this? Like every other tool has a category that it fits in,
Mhm.
and people don't have a mental model for it. They don't have a bucket to put it in. So that's where the blank stares are coming from. So, what category does Doc Detective fit into? It's an automation tool, it's a content testing tool, sure, but that still doesn't quite check all the boxes. So, I looked at the broader landscape.
Mhm.
And I looked at the terms that we use for various other strategies and categories of tools that we use. And I saw docs as code and docs as product and all these other docs ases. And it occurred to me, this is literally docs as tests, because we are treating the documentation itself as tests for the product, not as a cool, we've got the docs and we've got the tests for the docs and then we've got the product and we've got the tests for the product. No, we literally take the documentation content itself and treat it as inherently testable. What we ingest, the inputs are the source docs, not something that mirrors the source docs. But I'm getting ahead of myself. But so I started thinking about it as docs as tests.
Mhm.
And I looked around, and the more I looked, the more I saw of people doing flavors of this long before I ever started my work, like MongoDB doing SDK testing by writing unit test suites and then extracting snippets of it and including those in the docs so that they
Oh
knew
yeah,
that the
yeah.
content was good.
Mhm.
Variety of other folks who have done things like using Playwright to do UI testing of their docs docs procedures and similar things. I was like, there's something here. So I started talking about docs as tests, and I found immediate traction. I had there's a docs as tests blog, which is going to be getting some more love soon, and I put out some content there, and people were reacting to it. People were identifying with it, but I realized that there needs to be something more. There needs to be something comprehensive. So, getting back to your initial question that kicked off this whole series,
Hmm.
the book came about because I needed to know what this looked like in total.
Hmm.
I needed to know how can I comprehensively communicate everything that Docs as tests is, at least as of today, to folks who want to know, because no matter how much I wrote, no matter how much I spoke at conferences or whatever else, people kept asking, well, but what's next? How do I do it? How do I get started? How, like, okay, I've started, but what about this edge case? Okay, well, I've got UI testing, but what about my APIs or my CLI? And so I put it all down on to digital paper, well, now physical paper,
Hmm.
and to answer that question, all of those questions, to be able to say, Docs as tests is a solution for us to be able to test our content, regardless what our product interfaces are. And here are all of the considerations you need to keep in mind, regardless what interfaces you're testing.
Excellent. What advice would you give to someone who says, well, okay, this is a really cool idea, but I'm super intimidated?
Give yourself some grace and start
Mhm.
small. It's not as hard as you think it is.
Awesome.
It is easy to go to the deep end,
Hmm.
but if you are intentionally trying to keep it small and simple and isolated and do a test just to get your feet wet, 100% doable.
Hmm.
You don't have to do everything at once. You shouldn't do everything at once. You'll be trying to boil the ocean.
Yep. Eat it like an elephant, one bite at a time.
Exactly. There's something that I discuss in the book that I call the cupcake to wedding cake scale.
Hmm.
And the idea is simple. You don't start with the wedding cake. You start with a little cupcake. You find the smallest procedure. You find the smallest important doc in your doc set. And you try to test that. You don't even have to do the whole thing. You find just a single snippet or slice of that doc that you can test that you really want to make sure is good. And you test that. It
Hmm.
doesn't have to be across all of your interfaces. Just choose one. Test your UI or test your command line tool or whatever it is. And then once you have done that one thing, do another one thing and do another one thing and gradually expand up the scale to the birthday cake and figure out how you can get other people contributing. Figure out whether it's your team, whether it's other people in your organization. Build this muscle of testing your docs, of finding issues before they reach customers, of being able to build trust internally and through consistency and accuracy, build trust externally with your customers instead of doing the opposite by having outdated screenshots and inaccurate procedures.
Hmm.
And then once you have gotten yourself to a level of maturity where you're really comfortable and confident in this, then you can expand in other areas. So if you've tested all of your UI procedures, cool. Now it's time to start testing your CLI procedures. If you've done that, maybe instead you go over to your API based procedures, or if you're really enterprising, to your SDK procedures. But there are many ways to grow this. For example, maybe you're more comfortable starting off with tests that you write as tests themselves. And
Hmm.
maybe you do want to write just a YAML file or a JSON file that says, you know what, step through this procedure. So that's parallel to the document. But then once you're comfortable with running tests and understanding what's happening under the hood, then you can get to the point where you can programmatically detect tests from your Markdown or ASCII doc or DITA or whatever else.
Hmm.
So there are multiple different ways that you can approach this, but the message is that you can start small and you should start as small as you possibly can before you choose which direction you want to go explore next.
One other cool thing about Doc Detective is that it's open source. And I often hear people recommend to new writers that they volunteer for an open source project, but so many of the open source maintainers just don't have the patience or the bandwidth to, give the not quite technical writers, newly less technical writers, the support that they need. But it seems like Doc Detective would kind of be a logical place either for someone to get some open source experience or even maybe to take on some of the smaller programming tasks. I mean, I imagine that there are some simple tickets, and I know that we talked about there being some room for improvement in the documentation.
Most definitely. The way I see Doc Detective is it is part of my contribution back to the community because I could have kept it to myself
Hmm.
and I could have had a really cool tool that I would use, but I'm not the only one dealing with this problem. And so Doc Detective is out there. It is open source. That way, any of us can use it in our tasks and our jobs so that we can take it with us from job to job. And as part of my way of giving back to the community, I want it to be an opportunity for everyone. If there are people who want to come and join the community and contribute, you are more than welcome. Whether the contributions are for docs, whether the contributions are for code, whether the contributions are community management or design or anything else.
Oh, that's right. You were talking about a UI coming. So there's going to be some, room for UI design, UX testing, UX writing, all sorts of things that, people could get some experience in.
Yes. And so today we are exclusively a CLI tool, but there is more coming. There is a lot more coming. We have a VS Code extension that's in alpha right now that needs a little bit of UX love. But yeah, we're going to have an entire graphical user interface that's going to require a lot of design effort from a lot of different domains. So seriously, whatever you are interested in contributing, come and join the community. Let's figure out how we can get you helping. You are welcome. The one word of caution I have for contributors, and this is not just for Doc Detective, this is for anything open source, is don't do drive-by contributions.
Yeah.
I have seen it a lot in a lot of different open source projects where somebody comes in, never checks in with the owners, and then says, oh, hey, here's a PR for a new feature or for a new guide or changing the styling and fixing some grammar. Uh,
Fixing.
exactly. It's not all that well received because you don't know what's going on in the community. You don't know the priorities of the community. You may think that something is necessary, and maybe it is, but come and join the community and ask the maintainers, where can I be of most assistance? Or, hey, I have this idea for a cool thing. Do you think that would be of value to the project? And have that discussion. And if you do that, they will welcome you. I will welcome you with open arms. But don't assume you know what's best. Let's do this together.
Absolutely. So when we talked before, you were telling me about a whole DITA versus Dox's code feud that I apparently am completely ignorant of. So what's up with that?
So there are a lot of folks who have done technical writing in completely different domains and with completely different tools. And the thing is, all the tools are wonderful. They just have different pros and cons.
Hmm.
So DITA is, for those who are unaware, is Darwin Information Typing Architecture. It is very strongly structured content that is fantastic for single sourcing content and for producing a variety of deliverables from that single sourced content. It is primarily authored through CMSs or CCMSs, content management systems, and output via those CMS supported toolings. On what some people think is the other side of the house is Docs as code, which is very strongly influenced from engineering tooling and tool chains, where you choose the individual tools you want to use in your docs setup. You version your docs just like engineers version their code, but you have to do the legwork of knitting it all together. I have seen discussions where people say, no, DITA is better than Markdown, and that's completely missing the point because Docs' code isn't Markdown. Docs' code isn't restructured text or ASCII doc or even DITA itself. Docs' code is a methodology, philosophy, strategy, choose your synonym. And what it enables is you get to put together your tool chain. And there are a few pillars like version control but by and large, you get to knit together what you want.
Yeah.
And you have
I
to own what you want. Whereas folks who author in DITA more commonly work in the CMSs that I mentioned, which are a much more tailored environment. And there is a lot of handholding that goes along with that, especially where DITA is concerned. But you are, in many cases, restricted to what your CMS supports.
mhm.
And so it's not DITA versus Docs as code because, spoilers, you can do DITA in Docs as code.
Yeah.
There's DITA Open Toolkit, which is open source, and it is the tool that all of the CMSs use under the hood.
Yeah, and on the flip side, I once implemented a Docs as code process using Madcap Flare, which is just CSS and HTML and XML under the hood.
Mhm.
So,
And so, for all of those listening, it's not DITA versus Docs as code. It's not Markdown versus anything else. Docs as code, you need to write your content somehow. DITA is an
mhm,
option, Markdown's an option, ASCII Doc's an option. They're all sorts. It is a process differentiation. And these are all just different tools available. And some people will swear by some tools, some people will swear by some processes. But as I have been quoted as saying, there is no best tool. There's the
mhm.
tool that fits your needs and that fits your skills. And you know what? If that means you go with a CMS because you want somebody on the hook to help you debug things, cool, go for it. If you want to own your processes so that you know end to end what's happening and you can customize it to your heart's content without paying somebody else to do it for you, you're going to pay in time. But you know what? You get exactly what you want, and you can do
Mhm.
that with a Docs as code workflow. It's all just pros and cons.
Totally. What does Scott Abel think about all of this? I hear you mess with him about once a month. I mean, collaborate with him about once a month.
Scott is wonderful, and Scott and I hang out, chat, and he is a big CMS guy. I'm
Hmm.
a big Docs as code guy, and sure, we have different views on things, but we each respect each other's opinions on it. His audience tends to be more data focused. I am a pretty fierce Docs as code advocate, so we have some fun discussions from time to time, but it's wonderful collaborating with him.
What common ground have you found, or what have you guys learned from each other, do you think?
One of the big things I've learned from him is really what I just shared, that there is no best tool. I mean, for example, this came out of one of the first appearances I ever had with him. It was on a pros and cons of Markdown
Oh,
disc.
yeah, I remember that one. That was a cool one.
I think it was I was in part three or
Mhm.
so, but really it ended up not being a discussion about Markdown at all. It ended up being a discussion about Docs as code. And the two were erroneously being treated as synonyms for each other. But what came out of that was all of this thought where, like, if I'm writing a README,
Hmm.
I'm not going to do it in DITA. I'm going to
True.
do it in Markdown.
Hmm.
If I'm going to create a PDF that's going to be read on a factory floor without internet access, because by a technician who's trying to repair a piece of hardware, then I'm not going to write that in Markdown.
Hmm.
I'm probably going to write that in something structured, something
Yeah,
that has better PDF support, something like DITA maybe.
makes sense.
And especially if I needed to also output that to an online help site, then great. DITA is a pretty natural choice because you're reusing all these outputs, creating different content from them, and packaging them up in different formats.
But the
Now,
thing is, you don't really write in DITA, do you? You write in XML, but with the DITA as the organization.
yes, but writing XML using DITA as strategy is generally referred to as writing in DITA, at least in my
Oh,
experience,
fair enough, fair enough.
at least in shorthand.
Yeah,
But
I'm
you
just
know,
trying to explain it for people who, like me, who are more docs as code and who might not understand that DITA is not a language. DITA is a way of organizing the content that is generally written in XML and then processed by tools that understand the DITA architecture and you can then use to rearrange bits.
yes. And to further elaborate on that point, DITA has fairly strict structures. You can customize them. But if your content does not adhere to the structure, it is invalid. Here's how you can think about it. DITA is to documentation what strict typing is to engineering.
Oh, yeah, fair
Because
enough.
it doesn't let you give a value or format that does not match what has already been defined. Whereas Markdown or most of these other languages, it's a free for all. But Data does use XML under the hood. So you are using XML to author your content and then passing it into various Data tools that validate and package the content. But there is an entire spectrum between these two examples that I keep bouncing between Markdown and Data. We've got restructured text, which has more powerful content typing than Markdown does, but it and a lot of interactivity, especially with tools like Sphinx. But then we've also got ASCII Doc,
Mhm.
which if I was going to choose a single language to settle on, then that could do everything under the sun. It's going to be ASCII Doc because you can write a README in ASCII Doc. You can output a PDF in ASCII Doc. You can output help systems online in ASCII Doc. The big, the biggest drawback is that there isn't as much of a community around it. I mean, there
Mhm.
is a community around it, don't get me wrong, but you're not going to be able to get as many people contributing if you're writing an ASCII doc because not as many people know the syntax. So that's what I mean by pros and cons. Like if
Mhm.
we're talking about technical capability, then frankly, ASCII doc, which is based on DocBook, I'm going to put it up there with Dita as far as what it can do. But on the flip side, I'm not writing Doc Detective's content in ASCII Doc. It is in Markdown
Mhm.
because Markdown is accessible. I want people other than myself and my immediate team to be able to contribute and understand the source of my content. So I have it in Markdown to make it easier for folks like you, whoever's watching, to come over and hang out and join the community without having to learn an entire new syntax.
Absolutely. Oh, what advice would you give to new or aspiring writers right now?
Right now, experiment
Mhm.
and don't be afraid. Our industry is always in a state of flux. Always. It always has been. We've gone from, and this is a very general we've gone from writing in word processors to writing in structured environments to writing in docs as code environments to dealing with some of us dealt with the internet when it first emerged and we had gone from writing docs that were printed to migrating to online help systems. Now we're migrating again into AI optimized docs content and everything that entails. And it's fine. Yes, things change, but you're dealing with technology. It's kind of the definition of a changing landscape. So it's okay. And it's also okay to be uncertain or afraid sometimes. But know that there are others here. There are others who are going through it with you and who are here for you to lean on because we're all going through it together.
Absolutely. So, what do you do for fun?
Can I say code? Um,
You can if you want, but I was actually going for more for being a DM. But
oh, yeah.
anything you want, because
So, picking up that thread,
mhm.
I have been a lifelong DM. What that means to people who aren't quite in the know, I have been playing Dungeons and Dragons and other tabletop RPGs for I can strongly say the majority of my life at this point. I started in high school. I'm going to let you guess when that was. Uh,
I'm going to
but
guess 1.0.
I learned on a D&D first edition.
Nice.
And I played with a theater troupe. So I lean very heavy into the role playing and improvisational aspect of D&D. I am the forever DM, meaning I'm usually the one who runs the game rather than being a player.
Hmm.
But that works for me because of the creative writing that I mentioned
Yeah.
earlier and the being able to create narrative around player actions. And I love being able to give players agency and
Hmm.
have the story directly react to what they do. It's not like this interactive but ultimately limited sort of agency that you find in video games. This is really literally anything can happen. And it's limited only by the bounds of our imagination. And I love it. And I recently DM'd for the public.
Hmm.
And I had six people at a table, and I was playing with them. One of them had never played before. Some of them were more experienced. It was exhilarating. I also play with my boys,
Hmm.
and so I play simplified rule set. But I sit down and I had them saving a baby dragon just over the weekend that they
Nice.
named Icy, and they were befriending and they were trying to get it back to its mama.
What I have
So,
found interesting is that having that kind of role playing or LARPing experience has actually really helped me put on kind of what I call my new user brain, or try to think about things from the perspective of whoever my user is. And then also, I think maybe that DMing and the creative writing could also play a role in technical writing, or at least kind of thinking about what might my user be thinking? What actions might they take? What options should be available and what answers? What do you think?
exactly. I agree wholeheartedly because you are literally putting yourself in someone else's shoes.
Mm.
You are role playing. It's right there in the game category title. And by doing that, when you practice it, it's a skill like anything
Mhm.
else. And so you can look at something through a lens that is not entirely your own. Obviously, everything is going to be influenced by your own perspective in some way. You can never not be yourself, but you can at least get so far out of your normal lens that it is easier for you to perceive what someone else might need that others might miss. And once you see that, you can then turn around and advocate for those users. And that is wildly important. But also, this is what helps us be good bridges between all of the different functions we interact with, whether that's engineering, marketing, product, sales, and everybody else. Because we can understand and many times even anticipate what each of these different functions is going to need and be able to find the questions we need to ask so that when we're talking to products, like, cool, I get what it's trying to do, but what's the purpose of it? Why are we doing this? And then when we're turning around and talking to engineering, it's like, awesome, I understand this particular enum value for this API call, but why is it formatted this way? Or why don't we combine it with this other field to simplify the interface for the user? They're like, oh, well, we were working with our technical requirements. And it's like, okay, well, I mean, that's not to, I mean, that's what they have to work with. And that's
Yeah,
where they're coming at it from. But we provide insight that they simply don't have. And that's part of how we provide a tremendous amount of value, which is
true.
why I advocate for technical communicators being in as far to the left in the process as possible, as early in the process as possible. So like I review product requirement documents before engineering even starts building anything so that I can have feedback on it so that when engineering goes to start building stuff, it already has as much good user experience stuff baked into it as possible so they don't have to go back and redo work.
Yeah, and they really, really appreciate that. I mean, you and I could probably go on for an hour talking about how us asking questions and pointing things out saved a whole lot of engineering rework. We've all got those stories, but we are about at time. And thank you so much for this. I really enjoyed this chat, Manny.
Yeah, it was wonderful being here. Thank you so much for having me.
And everyone watching, thank you for joining us on this episode of Technical Writing Uncensored. All of the resources that we've mentioned in this conversation will be linked in the description. So have a good one, everyone.
Take care.